Way down south in Japanobama, where the cypress sways and the creek runs wide, there's a sacred stretch of muddy water where the heart of the people's always tied. Norbert and Aggie stood before the town, said the mud holes meant for one and all. But Jethro shoguns came riding in, built the tailgate temple tall. Yasuke's riding tall tonight, steel in his hand in the mud just right. Bound by honor, bound by land, for the folks who fish, for the kids who stand. Oh, Yasuke's riding tall tonight. Through the pines and past the levee came the warrior bold and true, with a heart as strong as the rising sun and a four-wheel drive that flew. Jethro's clan stood shoulder to shoulder, coolers stacked and bonfires high. But Yasuke called the river spirit, and the flood rolled in with a battle cry. Yasuke's riding tall tonight, steel in his hand in the mud just right. Bound by honor, bound by land, for the folks who fish, for the kids who stand. Oh, Yasuke's riding tall tonight.
And now for something completely different. I'd like to say thank you to Shohei Kondo up here for providing, to my knowledge, the only English translation to what happened yesterday during the meeting of Japan's National Diet. That's the federal level Congress over in Japan, okay? Now, Shohei, to my knowledge, is the only one who's provided an English translation to this time, so thank you very much. Really appreciate that. To introduce you, though, to what's happening here, this is Senator Hiroyuki Kada. We'll get into his video a little bit later, but he is a member of Japan's Liberal Democratic Party. To say that they're Japan's Republicans is kind of close, but not exact. They're a traditionalist party that leans into business connections, and they do have more of a multifaceted platform than what we would consider a conservative platform here in the US, but they are regarded as the more conservative side of the spectrum as far as Western political standards are considered. So, just so you know what we're dealing with here going in, because again, Shohei is speaking as someone who is grown up in this and had an experience, or at least culturally has a relation to the information that you and I don't have just off the bat. And so as we go, I'll explain some more things, because this, again, very different from how our government functions and the rudimentary processes that they have to go through just to get a conversation going. Very different from what we do here. So here we go.
明日3月20日にですね、発売予定のフランスのUBI ソフトの株式会社制作のゲームソフトのアサシンクリードシャドウズにですね、ついてなんですけど、海外で先行プレイの動画が YouTube でアップされておりまして、それを拝見いたしますと。
So Shohei's about to explain that clip from Scatha, where again, Scatha did not know that this was a very important religious space that had survived 1400 years. So again, when he went in there and just raised hell in what he believed was just another Japanese environment, again, that's not Scatha's fault. I want to stress that, okay? The streamer did not have any hey, by the way, don't go screw up these religious spaces, even though we allow you to screw them up, okay? It's gotten so bad that Automation West is reporting that Assassin's Creed Shadows will feature a day one patch that will make sure that you can't destroy certain objects within these shrines, okay? It'll also eliminate civilian NPC bloodshed. So again, what were they thinking? Just sending this out here where you just screw up anybody you ran across.
That video that went to really viral.
As you can see, again, Scatha did not know that this was a very important space. He showed up in our comments section and explained that he was just doing a regular playthrough. Nobody told him what that space was or what he would encounter in there, and that was the map where that space is one of the spaces they were sort of relegated into for the playthrough they were allowed to show, okay?
That there's a lot of people who think that's okay. I think most of people doesn't know that's that shrine and altar, I guess. But a lot of Japanese people feel offended about that video.
イタテ氷図シュラインと実名で私の兵庫県の
So what he's explaining here, okay, is that this is Hiroyuki is what I'm talking about. It's who I'm talking about here. Hiroyuki is explaining that the shrine is responding to this. And so he's bringing the shrine's case to the national diet.
姫路市の入間の国奏者板手氷津神社が登場します。ゲームの中でですね、主人公の侍は刀を振り回して拝殿内で太鼓や神教、祭壇を粉砕します。
Okay, and again, you must understand that in Japan, this is very important. Again, I've talked about this in a previous video about retroactively going back and looking at this, having a retrospective view of what the other games were. And I've decided I don't like the idea that these people who lived in these times, who are these assassins, would just suddenly start desecrating religious spaces. Oh, well, I took a vow to hunt down some alien BS here, so I guess I can just destroy all religion now. It doesn't mean anything. I can parkour inside of Notre Dame. I can punch the Pope in the face. That kind of stuff, you know? So I do think that that was from the get-go a bad idea. You know, making religious figures in religious spaces, though they were centers of power at this time, battlefields, I think making those places battlefields is a very bad idea. Again, the Japanese managed to do this, having fights inside of cathedrals, and yet they still, like the anime and video games, having fights inside of cathedrals and countryside churches, but somehow they managed not to piss all over God doing it. And yet here you have a space where you can just walk right in and obliterate. To kind of put this in perspective, you remember that there's like these very, very intricate carvings of Jesus on the cross in some of these churches. This would be the equivalent of having a video game that allows you just to go in and slice that up. You know, like Raiden did in Assassin's Creed. Yeah, that would be a way more entertaining game if Raiden found his way into it. But remember Raiden in Metal Gear Rising? Yeah, that one. The one with the really cool dog. Yeah. Anyway, this is what they're talking about: is like going in there and completely slicing up that space is kind of like comparable to this, because this again is a religious space. It doesn't, to the West, we don't recognize it as that. It's some stuff in a room, and we haven't been taught, unless you take special attention to ancient Japanese faith and the practices of the Shinto, you wouldn't know this. You wouldn't know that. Okay. Again, this is a shrine that exists today and has survived intact 1400 years, that you could just walk in and obliterate as Yasuke, an outsider.
まして、そして境内にいる向こうの民や神職とおもしき人物などを切りつけ弓を射ったりするような乱暴狼藉ができるようになっています。
Yeah, that's the things. They can just disable it, but they made it object that breakable.
私
And what Shohei's talking about is that when they're breakable, they also make a sound, right? And they also have a physics to them when they hit the ground, and how they behave in certain ways. So a drum doesn't behave the same way as a brick, right? Doesn't make the same noise as a piece of wood hitting the ground when the drum gets sliced in half, you see? And so this again is like that sort of intentional idea behind all of this, that, okay, so these obviously religious objects are now having destruction sounds applied to them. It seems very surface area to us in the West, and I understand this is so tedious and it's not entertaining. I understand. But this is what it is to have a culture defend itself against corporate exploitation. And if we have any hope of wresting our identity back from Disney, from Hollywood, from the centers of power here in the USA, here in the West, we really need to start paying attention to what's happening here. Because they're not going to ban this game. That's the spoiler, okay, guys? Here's the insider take. They're not going to ban the game. What they're going to do, though, is they're going to pass laws that apply very severe punishments to people who abuse these spaces, even in fiction. Okay? Because right now they have a huge problem. They're going to talk about this in a minute, so we'll get there.
私はこの話を聞いてですね、ちょっと地元の神社でもありますので、直接宮司さんにお話を伺いました。当該ゲーム会社からは神社に対しまして、名称の使用許可などの連絡は一切なかったということであります。他にも奈良の東大寺などの寺社や古墳などのいわば具体的な映像とか肖像がですね、無許可で使用されております。
Now you see the guy in the background. He can't believe what he's hearing. This is a mixture of, I can't believe this exists, and I can't believe this has also been brought to our attention all the way up here, that it got this bad. You can see that people are picking their heads up from taking their notes and they're paying attention to what he's saying, and they have this bizarre expression on their face of just perplexity of like, what? Someone made a game that you destroy religious spaces in? This is what they're hearing.
本日はですね、大串正樹経産副大臣にお越しいただいておりますが、国内外問わずゲームを楽しむユーザーというのは年々増加しておりますが、ゲーム等における固有施設の映像などをですね、無許可で使用することについてご見解をお伺いしたいと思います。
So, in order to begin addressing this through the Economic Affairs Department or Ministry, I guess this is, they need to start addressing them in the governing space. And so, thus, these people become part of the conversation rather than having them brought in as a witness randomly. Okay? And so, what we're going to hear here is that from here, Prime Minister Ishiba is going to get brought into the conversation.
経済産業省大串副大臣。
This is just kind of insider note. I know some people that send me this video. So, they didn't use word of Yasuke. Can't talk about it that detail, but something really scared concerns me. It's that there's an unspoken rule. You cannot cause other trouble to other ministries. I heard they can't use word of Yasuke in here. If we were Japanese, I think this is one of the biggest concern. And they decided to not to mention about Yasuke. That's what they told me. But my concern is that which ministry get trouble if they use word of Yasuke in here? As a Japanese, that's one of the biggest concern. What's going on, really?
So there's two prongs to this. Right now, Japan, and they're going to talk about this in a minute, they're dealing with an immigration problem. There's a lot of, a tourism problem. And hold it! It looks like 73% of you watching this aren't subscribed. Time to click that button. You know where to find it. And on top of that, there's a lot of resentment over immigration. Almost 70% of Japanese really disapprove of the rate of which immigration's coming in, and only 23% believe that there should be more immigration happening, okay? Now you can guess who those 23% are. But the situation that Shohei is talking about is that inside of the government itself, to this discussion about the destruction of the shrine and what's happening here, they bring up that, Shohei brings up rather, that the government, LDP, is not addressing the, that Yasuke did this, okay? Now that doesn't have anything to do with the cultural importance of Yasuke or Yasuke being black. It has nothing to do with that. What it actually has to do with is that LDP has held power for the majority of Japan's, I wouldn't say democratic process, because again, there was splurts of it going on at the time before the U.S., World War II happened and we nuked them and gave them the constitution that they operate under now. So I guess this is LDP has held power since the Constitution of Japan was established, basically. There's only been a few breaks in the 90s and around 2009 that LDP wasn't the majority party or the party that had a prime minister sitting on top of all of the actions going on in Japan. So, again, like this is why they're bringing this up is because there's a lot of immigration happening right now. There's a lot of push to bring tourism in to make up the gap of funding with the lack of people being there to generate money for the economy. So we need to bring in more tourism in order to have that outside money and to make sure these people go home. We're going to need more immigration in order to take care of the roads that are now being eroded faster in order to clean up after all these dirty tourists that keep coming in here and destroying our spaces and trashing all over the place. And we also need more police officers in order to keep things under control when a Johnny Somali type shows up and gets off on destroying things and the peace, if you will, destroying the peace. And so that's why they can't bring it up. It's because it opens up a dialogue in Japan about outsiders misbehaving in a more direct manner. They're going to address that tourists are destroying these spaces. But LDP cannot address that immigrants, and Yasuke is by definition an immigrant. He was brought in by Nobunaga, right? He was brought in either a slave or a retainer, a sword bearer, whatever he was considered a citizen of Japan at that time. Now, was he a Japanese person? No, not the same. He was a citizen of Japan in the sense that he lived there. Just the way that I live in Maine, I am a citizen of Maine, right? Okay? That's the way that works, right? That he was not considered a Japanese person, but he lived in Japan, right? He was an immigrant, if you will, okay? And so this is why LDP can't talk about Yasuke, is because it opens up a conversation about ill behavior with immigrants, and they can't deal with that right now because that's the only solution they're embracing to deal with their economic downturn. And again, Shohei might not grasp this because, again, like he's on the inside and he's dealing with more cultural things. This is my opinion from the outside and the pieces I've been able to put together, studying what's going on with the LDP's current like drop in approval ratings. Like, people are positive about Trump. They're not like jumping all over the place. You see those people going around carrying the Trump floats and stuff like that. But, 68% of the Japanese are cautiously optimistic about Trump, right? Cautiously optimistic. So again, it's not like it's exploding all over the place over there for Trump, but LDP being at 26% approval rating really tells you why they don't want to talk about Yasuke, okay? Because it's going to open up conversations about things they don't want to continue talking about.
お答えいたします。一般的なゲーム制作におきまして、
By the way, this is the economic minister here, or representative of it, and so he's going to speak on behalf of how video games are working. Just so we're back in the conversation we left.
現存する固有名詞等を商用利用する際には、その知的財産を有する個人や団体等に許可を得る必要があるものと認識をしております。知的財産を無許諾で利用されているケースにおきましては、個別の事情によるものであるため、当事者間で協議されるものと承知をしております。その上で、神社側等から相談がございましたら、関係省庁と連携しつつ適切に対応してまいりたいというふうに思います。
So what he's explained here, just because that was kind of quick, okay? So what he explained here was that we are willing to work with the shrine to deal with this, but they have to talk to us first. So far, the shrine has only reached up as far as the senator and representative, okay? That's it. That's all that they've reached up for. And so they need to go further and get in touch with the Economic Affairs Ministry. And they will be happy to render a verdict on this and pursue conversation with Ubisoft, perhaps the French government over this. Because again, where LDP is in a situation where they don't want to talk about Yasuke, they're going to want to make an issue about this. They need something to kind of reinforce their cultural heritage, if you will, that they're the party of cultural values, that they're not selling out the nation to this immigration thing, that they're not selling out native Japanese to these cheaper workers, that sort of thing. So they may pursue this in a way of revitalizing their "we are the Japanese party of Japanese tradition." They may pursue it in that function. Not exactly sure. I'm not on the ground. I don't live there. This is just my assumption through I've read because I follow their culture as a hobbyist. Okay? I didn't go to college for this, okay? I haven't even stepped foot in Japan. I just like reading about their culture and I'm interested in how their politics work. I'm just a hobbyist. That's it.
加田博之君。
ありがとうございます。今の答弁ありましたようにですね、やっぱり無許可で使用するということは本当にいけないことだと思いますし、本当にこのことについては私もしっかりと注視していきたいと思っております。
And so, Hiroyuki Kada, the man that's speaking right now, he is up for re-election, just so you know. Okay, I'm not trying to undermine his argument, but just so you know why this has risen to the national level and why these party members, who may or may not be influential members, but for the moment are, at least on this topic, are raising their voices and making themselves known, particularly right now. Do I believe that this wouldn't be an issue outside of an election year? No, I think that they would take this seriously even if they were comfortable in their power and they weren't under a poor approval rating. I think that they would still take this seriously because, again, we value our culture much less than they do here. They value it much higher than we do. I would say that the Japanese have more respect for American culture than we have for American culture, okay? And I've followed it for most of my life. So you have to take kind of like your own taste of it. But for me, I feel like they have more respect for our culture than we do. And so when these guys come through and they start defending what their culture is, we really need to start paying attention to it.
それでですね、それに伴いまして、昨今、コロナ禍の影響も薄れまして、観光客が急回復しまして、各地でオーバーツーリズムによるさまざまな問題が生じております。
So now Hiroyuki is now bringing up we're seeing coming out of there. Okay, I don't live in Japan. I'm not dealing with this, but what we're seeing coming out of Japan right now with the over tourism thing, stuff that was inspired by Johnny Somali, stuff that was inspired by Logan Paul, the misbehavior in Japan for clicks because people in Japan either don't react or have different reactions than Americans and Westerners would. So this is something to remember going forward in this conversation is that they're tying the misbehavior of Yasuke in the shrine to a greater problem going on with people disrespecting Japanese culture, outsiders coming through and treating the country like a giant theme park.
中に神社の鳥によじ登ったりですね、神社の石柱へ落書きするなど、観光客の迷惑行為は観光公害とも言える事態であります。
That's also something I've been talking about on my channel. We have a lot of foreigners who do that. I gotta be honest, just because they think Japanese won't fight back, Japanese won't say anything, or they're taking advantage of Japanese politeness or kindness, or even shyness. And it's very natural that as a Japanese, if you see that game, we feel like, oh, they can do that because they think Japanese won't say no.
私は当該のゲーム機の中で、NPC、ノンプレイヤーキャラクターっていうものに対して、
And so he's reiterating this abuse from outside again, that these people and places were used without permission in tandem with how these abuses are being practiced on Japanese religious sites and Japanese cultural spaces.
対してとかですね、承諾された承諾なく使用された施設の映像の中で攻撃や破壊する行為が現実世界で模倣される迷惑行為につながるんではないかと懸念しております。先ほどの神社の宮司さんや関係者の皆様もそれを心配されておりました。もちろんですけど、これ申し上げたいのは表現の自由というものはもちろん尊重されなければいけません。だが一方でですね、長い間地域の方々に培われた文化に対しまして。
And so what they're talking about is how there is a freedom of expression law in Japan that allows people to interpret these things how they like. However, the certain protocols surrounding these religious and cultural spaces were not observed in the process of doing this. Now, what I want to skip to for the brevity of time is when Prime Minister Ishiba, this is the basically the president of Japan, coming out and weighing in on this. Again, please understand that Japanese function very differently than we do, a lot less fire and brimstone and a lot more efficiency rather than blustering, okay?
千葉内閣総理大臣。
これを法的にどうするかということにつきましては、経産省あるいは文科省あるいは外務省とよく協議をしてまいりたいと思っておりますが、神社に落書き。
Okay, so for the video game, again, no surprise here. Like I said, he wants to sit down with the foreign ministry, okay? And he wants to sit down with the economic ministry. So he's not just satisfied with the economic getting involved with this. He wants the foreign ministry to be involved with this video game too. Now, again, what I have to remind everybody is that this is also part of this, cultural revitalization thing that the LDP is trying to do in order to make sure that they appear as the party of traditional values that they bill themselves as, okay? Again, I'm not trying to take the wind out from under this. I'm just trying to explain why this is an issue, why the prime minister has weighed in on this. Now, that's what he has to say about the video game. What he says now is he's talking about the tourism that is destroying Japan and its religious sites.
落書きするなんぞというのはもってのほかの話であってですね。
Oh, this just happened. That happened before.
それはもう
Guy was
その
arrested
国に対
carving
する
things
侮
into
辱
it.
に他ならないと私は思っておるところでございます。で自衛隊をイラク・サマーワに
So this is Ishida talking about his time being in charge of Japanese self-defense forces that went to Iraq, and he goes on to explain how they prepared themselves for interaction with the Iraqis by familiarizing themselves with Islam and Islamic cultural practices. And he draws a distinction between how in Japan you clean your plate because this is polite. You do not want to leave a dirty plate or food that is left over, implying that you were not satisfied with the quality of the meal. However, in Iraq, and particularly under the Islamic cultures that are practiced there, completing a meal meant that you were still hungry, that you were not satisfied with the portion that you were provided. So leaving some on the plate indicates that you were very satisfied with the meal. It was wonderful, and that you simply could not eat any more of it. You are so full of wonderful food. And so again, he's trying to illustrate that when you are in a foreign nation, you should behave as though you are a guest. You should understand the customs there and whatnot. Now, this applies to Ubisoft and tourism in this same manner, right? That when you go to another country to make a video game, the idea, based on the culture of that video game and the history of that culture, right? The idea is that you would go in there and want to celebrate that rather than want to turn it on its head, which, as we've seen Ubisoft do constantly with Japan. Now, again, Japan is still dealing with the womenomics upsurge, where they've moved women out of a submissive position in their culture into a productive position in their culture. It's not unheard of to have women in the workplace, but under Shinzo Abe, his second time as prime minister, there was a very big push to put women into the workforce in a more masculine fashion. And so this is another thing that they're dealing with over there, trying to deal with where men belong in the culture now that women are treated as the same equal to them. And there's a lot of tug and pull that goes on with this. It's not great with the current culture of where men and women belong in Japan. It contributes to some of the birth crisis, similar to how we're having a problem over here in the West. So again, this contributes to this, though, because who is one of the protagonists? That's right, Naoe, a female ninja, as she's explained to me, a female shinobi, as she's explained in the advertising, even though that is a konoichi, as it's known over there in Japan. But again, that does not get a lot of Google searches, so that's why they put Naoe as a ninja, because it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The reason why Yasuke is a black samurai is because, again, it's controversial. It'll get attention on the game. It does more to attract attention to the game than it would to have a Japanese protagonist. And that's why they did this, because they were bored of doing what was the right thing to do. They were bored of obeying what would be splendid, what would be correct, what would be celebrated as a victory. They wanted to do something that captivated the prankster vibe inside of them. Now, I said we would get to the senator's video here, and we're running out of time. We're running pretty long here, almost a half an hour into this video if you've stayed this long. So what I want to get to is just what he does is he gets a question from one of his constituents, and he explains that, yes, we brought it forward, and what he expects to happen is that the shrine will be put in contact with the Economic Affairs Department and also the Foreign Affairs Ministry. These are two ministries, sorry. The Economic Ministry and Foreign Affairs Ministry under Ishiba. He does not say anything about banning the game. He does not say anything about retribution against Ubisoft. And again, what I think is going to happen here in the long run, honestly, is that they're going to pass laws that restrict how religious spaces are interacted with on a commercial level. You may not be able to visit them as a foreigner. Or at least you may not be able to visit them as a foreigner unless you have a visa or some type of attempt to stay in the country long enough to be punished if you screw it up. Okay? So again, this is something that is going to continue to unfold, guys. You're going to have to let me know what you think down in the comments below. And I appreciate you hanging out with me this long to talk about this. I really do like Japanese culture. I really do like it down on the level of like understanding how their politics work, how their day-to-day lives go. I'm just fascinated. That's all. I'm just a hobbyist. I like learning about this stuff. And so I try to bring forth what I know about things, what I have learned and studied to you guys, so we have a more complete picture of all this rather than they're going to ban the game, guys, 2 more weeks.